Yeah, that'd be swell. Thank you. Good morning, y'all, or afternoon or evening, or wherever you are in the world. Happy December the 17th, 2022. Let's talk about what's new in PyScript 2022.12.1, which was released this past Tuesday at time of writing. Of course, if you're watching this in the far future, things may have changed by the time of your present version, so check the documentation for new things. If you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, I will put timestamps down in the description down below. So if you want to jump to a specific topic in 2022-12-1, you can jump ahead to that. I will try and do my best to use this little timeline on the bottom of the screen to indicate where in the program we are. It's possible I'll forget at some point, but I'll fix the timestamps after the fact. So without further ado, let's get started. Let me jump over to our coding display here, where we have a bunch of hello worlds. I will say part of the reason for doing this live is that if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have interesting things you've tried and have broken and want to ask about, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and I will do my best to answer your questions as we go. Well, without further ado, let's talk about the new display functionality in PyScript 2022-12.1. And let's start with, I'm just going to, for a moment, I'm going to jump over here back to version 2022.9.1. So in 2022.9.1, the main way that you would output from your PyScript program to the browser window would be to use the Python function print. Which we all know and love from the console. I do print, I can do print hello world, and it just shows up in my window as HTML text. And this is all well and good, but the metaphor of standard out, right? Standard out, which is where the print statement writes to, is that it writes a number of lines to a file-like object, literally a Python object with write and open and close methods, and that those appear in your terminal. The browser window is not really equivalent to a file-like object, right? We have so much more possibility for how things can be laid out, where things can be placed, how they can be adjusted. And so this idea that we're sort of wrapping up standard out with a sort of a context manager under the hood, and then taking that output and shoving it into the browser window didn't really hold up. It was interesting, but we want to have a sort of different metaphor for how we're getting our output from our Python programs into the browser. So if I jump back over here to 2022.12.1, the new way that we intend to get output into the browser window is using a new function called display. So the equivalent of the program we just wrote to display hello and world would be display hello, display world. And if we run that, we'll see we get their same display, hello, and world, right? So nothing terribly complicated so far. But the display function has a couple of additional options that print or writing to standard out does not have. One you may be aware, it may be sort of self-explanatory. One parameter is the append parameter, which defaults to true. right? So if I run this, nothing should change if both of these are true. Append equals true. I should see hello and world. If you set append to false, you will see that your secondary output replaces the first output. We're no longer appending to our output. We are replacing it, right? What's happening under the hood here, I should say, is that by default, when you use the display function without a specific target, and we'll get to that in a sec, the place it's putting it into the DOM, if I open up my inspector here, and I will increase this text size so we can actually see what's going on here. Be a little bit more there. Something like that. That might be a little generous. Yeah, here, let's shrink that down a little bit. If we look here at our PyScript tag that has an ID that's been generated for us. There's a reason under the hood why it's useful for PyScript tags to have IDs. So if you don't give it an ID, it will generate one for you. In here, we can see that our display statements have created child divs containing our output. So here's our PyScript tag. Here's the div containing world. We can see it's only world because we set append equal to false. If we set append on our second statement back equal to true, or if we omitted it and it defaulted to true, we would see two divs, hello, and world. So this is where our output is going by default with the display statement. Now, I mentioned earlier, this is if you don't give it a target. And we should talk about targeting because it is super powerful. And this is really what drove the idea that we want to have a better metaphor for how we're outputting to the browser window. So back over here on my left, if I want the output from my Python scripts to go to a specific place, I can use the target attribute of the display function. And the target attribute takes the ID of a tag in the DOM. So if I have a div here with the ID myOutputTag, and I give my display function the target with the string myOutputTag, then the output will go to that tag. Let me show you that this is actually happening here. We'll create a new paragraph with the value first. I'll create a second paragraph, with the value second. And if I don't use this target attribute, right, well, what we should see is first, this will be blank, this will be nothing. Second, so first, second, hello, world is what I would expect we see. We'll find out if I'm wrong. Yeah, first, second, hello, world, right? If I want the output to instead go to this div that is in between those two tags, I can use the target equals my output tag and target equals my output tag. And now hopefully what we'll see is first, hello, world, second. And if we take a quick look here and inspect the DOM itself, inspect, what we will see is in our body, we have first, our first tag, we have our div, our output tag, which now contains child divs, hello and world, and then our second tag. So again, the display function by default is wrapping our content, our text content, in a div and putting it as sequential siblings of the targeted tag. So we have this div myOutputTag that we created earlier, and we're writing hello and world to it, and then second, right? So that's the general use of the targeting function in PyScript 2022-12.1. I will say so basically if you omit targets, right, the target that it uses is the PyScript tag itself. We saw this a moment ago, right? If you don't provide an explicit target, it will try and just create children of where this PyScript tag is. That works most of the time, especially if you're running synchronous code. The place where we see this fall apart a little bit is that default display target is not maintained across coroutines and not necessarily across event calls. And I just want to show you what that looks like, so if you see it pop up in your code, you know how to fix it. So rather than having this just be a plain bit of code, I'm going to make this a coroutine. I'm going to use async def corow, and we'll make this a coroutine. And then to schedule it, I will use async.io. So we'll do import async.io. And then after we defined our coroutine, I'll say async.io.ensure future corow. And I tell you what, let's give ourselves a little bit of an ability to see this happen. So I'll say await async.io.sleep1, sleep2 beforehand. So this will wait 2 seconds and then try and print hello and world to the DOM. And we'll see if we can cause this to error. 1, 2. Ooh, not even a little bit. Async def. It's possible I have a linting error here and something is Oh yes, so this is a case where this error is failing silently within the coroutine. What's happening here is that the default display location that sort of like output to this PyScript tag is only valid for the execution of the PyScript tag itself. But by scheduling it as a coroutine, we're scheduling it into the browser's event loop to happen some other time where that default has been lost. So if we want this to happen in a coroutine or as part of an event function call, we will need to provide a target. So let me re-add our target function here, our target argument to the display function. And what we should see is, yes, after 2 seconds, hello world pops up inside of our target div again. So if you're doing something with coroutines and you're finding that this is your display is being swallowed, you may need to provide an explicit target to your display function because it's no longer able to identify which PyScript tag it was called from. Make some sense? There is a really nice error message that pops up for this. I think it is not appearing because of the way we do async IO error handling currently, so we'll see if we can improve that. Well, we'll come back to this when we get to the event subsection, but that is the gist of the display function. The display function also has all the functionality built into it that print formerly had. If you pass it a rich object, like a PNG or a matplotlib plot, it will display that in your browser as well. So it's a lot like what the print function was doing. We're just not overloading print. What we are doing with print is very interesting. So I said you should be using display to print things to the browser. What happens if a user, and it would be very understandable, just comes into their PyScript tag and says print hello world, right? The sort of canonical first Python program. What happens? Oh, we get this white text on black in pre-formatted monospace. What is going on here? So this is another extension of the functionality of PyScript output. This is what we're calling a PyTerminal. And in fact, if we examine the DOM, if we inspect here, we should see, I think it's being hidden in, yes, here we go. We actually have, it is added this py-terminal tag to the DOM for us. And this is now the default behavior for when you write to standard out, in other words, when you use print. So if I do multiple statements, if I say print my name is Jeff and run that, what we get is a PyTerminal with hello world, my way is Jeff. My name is Jeff. So this is our way of making sure that if users, who are new to PyScript or are relatively new to Python are like, let me just throw a program at it, let's hello world it, something shows up on the screen. This is not meant to be an exact replica of, a bash terminal or something like that. This is meant to be a representation of terminal text that appears in the browser so that when you're writing to standard out, something happens and we're not just sort of silently swallowing your output, because that wouldn't be great form. You could, of course, use this as the primary output from your program, but if you were doing that, maybe you want to, use the display function to write to your own pre-formatted div that has exactly the styling you want. This is sort of our default that we're currently providing. So mostly making sure that like standard out shows up somewhere on your screen. Now, let's say you're running a program or perhaps a library which is outputting to standard out, but you don't want this PyTerminal showing up somewhere on your page. There is a new option in PyConfig, which is called terminal, which defaults to auto. And auto just says if there, and we'll see if it is a string. I was like, is it a string? Yeah, it's a string. It defaults to auto. If terminal is auto, then when we first write to standard out, or we first print something, that PyTerminal tag will be injected at the end of the body of the page, right? This is sort of like the default, like if somebody does print hello world, something shows up on screen, right? But if you don't want that, you can do terminal equals, I believe it's false. Oops. Oh, here we go. Ah, yes, cool. We've got a nice clear error message. The config supplied terminal equals false is invalid because I think it is not capitalized in TOML. Yes, it's true. Yeah, so with terminal equals false, we can see that nothing actually is appended to the DOM at all. That just sort of disables the terminal output. So if you have a program that you definitely do not want to write your standard out, even if you do it accidentally, you do terminal equals false. You can also use terminal equals true, and that will definitely add it in there at the end of the body. You can also, if you want to, place the PyTerminal exactly where you want it by just adding a terminal tag to your page, right? So in this case, by default, rather than sort of placing the PyTerminal at the end of the body, it will put it wherever you have already included your PyTerminal tag on the page. So in this case, PyTerminal comes before first and second, and we can see over here in the output, hello world, Jeff Glass is before first and second. So if you don't include one, the default is to just throw one on the page at the end of the body. If you do include one, it will use that, right? And that's PyTerminal, a sort of basic way of making sure output from standard out is visible on the page. The other place that standard out goes, if I open the console here, is we will see standard out actually goes to the developer console. So you see down here at the bottom, I have hello world, my name is Jeff. So if you need a really easy side channel to get feedback from your Python program, but you don't want this PyTerminal on the page, so for example, I've come over here and I say terminal equals false, I'll disable that terminal, but I can still see the results of my print statement will show up, oops, terminal equals, oh, you know what it was? I have PyTerminal equals false, but I still have a PyTerminal tag in the page, which is just using. We'll delete that PyTerminal, and now we should see that, yeah, no PyTerminal on the page, but over here in the development console, I still get hello world, my name is Jeff. So you could be using the development console log directly from Python if you wanted to, but this is a really easy way to just have a simple standard out side channel to do debugging or what have you. That is the gist of PyTerminal and writing to standard out in the browser. Cool. Well, now I'm feeling very clever because I am going to remember to advance my subsection here. And let's talk about fetch configurations. This is super cool. I'm super stoked about this. Madhur was the sort of lead architect on this, but a lot of people had their hands in the ball. And it's awesome. So let's do this in comparison to Python, to a PyScript 2022.9.1. So here we are, 2022.9.1, we're back. And I have prepped a couple of files here. You can see in the sidebar. So I'm in this demo.html file. I have an a.py and a b.text. And let's say I want to bring them into my PyScript program to do something with them. Maybe read the context of b.text. So in 2022.9.1, what you would have done is added b.text to paths, right? Your paths parameter of pyconfig. And then in your PyScript tag, you would do, sorry, they're running away from me here a little bit. In your PyScript tag, you would do with open b.text in read mode as fp, print fp.read, something like that. And this is some text in b.text, which is exactly what is in b.text, right? So this was our model before. We are providing file names to the paths variable, and it was bringing them into the Inscriptin virtual file system so that we could use them inside PyScript. This is pretty cool, right? This mostly just works. The problem is that in 2022.9.1, every single file was put in the same folder that we are executing script tags from. So let me show you what I mean. Inside my pack folder here, short for package, which is not accidental. Let's say I have c.py and d.py. And what I'd like to do is bring those in and import them and use some of the functionality in c.py and d.py. So we'll come back over to our code. I'll import from pack/c.py. Which should put this in a package. So I should be able to say from pack import C, right? Because that's the way our package is structured. But we'll see that if I print out all of the local files in my current directory, I just have a little stub of code here that recursively walks all the files in my directory. All of the files in 2022.9.1 were being put in the same location as the PyScript tag. And now I've crashed it by having a typo. This is something else that got fixed in 2022.9.1, is that if you had malformed toml in your pyconfig, it would actually crash the page. Like the toml would never load. So I actually have to kill my live server and restart it so we can see this demo again. That has been fixed in 2022.9.1. So as we were saying, so I've imported these two files, b.text and pack/c.py, and we can see both of them are just in the same folder in my current working directory. And there was no way to get this c.py to be in a different folder using the mechanisms that PyScript puts in place. we could do some things manually with the Inscripted file system. The pyodide runtime does give you access to that file system. We could basically run the equivalent of make dir, you pack, and then move the file. We could do it manually, right? We're not forbidden from doing it. We just didn't have a mechanism for it. 2022.12.1 makes this just so much better. So let me reload my stub for 2022.12.1 here and talk to you a little bit about a fetch configuration. So a fetch configuration is a TOML array of tables. That's what this double bracket syntax here means. And a fetch configuration, and you can have multiple of them in the same pyconfig if you would like to. A fetch configuration is the means by which we now get files into the local Inscripted file system. There are 4 possible parameters to a fetch configuration. They are, and I'm just going to comment them out just so they're not confusing us for confusing the fetch config for now. They are files from, it's trying to autocomplete for me, files from to folder and to file. Files and to file are mutually exclusive, and to file is kind of its own beast. So I'm going to put it down here. We'll talk about it in a second. The way that these 3 parameters interact, I'm going to say you should think about as follows. Files takes a list of file names. So I could say b.text. And then for every file in files, append that file name to the string from, and fetch content from that URL, and place it into a file in the local file script, in the local file system, which is to folder plus that file. Let me say that a slightly different way. So here, let's do a worked example because I think it will make some more sense. So right now, right, I've commented out these 2 lines. We're just doing files equals b.text, and I'm going to bring back my my bit of script here that just walks through the files in the local directory. You can see, because I'm using print, that, of course, now we're showing up in a PyTerminal as opposed to just HTML. So when I load b.text, just, as a file, it shows up in my local directory. We also have PyScript.py. Put a pin in that. We're going to come back to it later. This is another really nice improvement. So what this did is say, take my folder b.text, append it to, by default, the local the current working folder, or sorry, the relative URL space, which is nothing, and then send it to a file which is by default the current working directory plus this file. So we fetched from the relative URL b.text and put it in /b.text, which is what we see over here. Does that sort of make sense? Probably not, so I'm going to do a few more examples. So let's say now that I wanted to place this b.text inside its own folder or series of folders. I can use the toFolder attribute. We'll just move this up here. toFolder attribute, say this/is/some/folder. Oops. Let's see. What have I? Something about my syntax here. From equals .to file. Oh, something about this syntax doesn't like. We'll just get rid of that for a second. Oh, I forgot an equal sign is part of the problem. There we go. So I have files, b.text, and toFolder. It's this string of folders. This is some folder, and we can see that file ended up in this/is/some/folder/b.text, right? We've taken this file name and put it in some folder. And this is true for every file that we include in files. So if I include another file that I have pre-prepared, a.py, also here, and I run that, we see that both a.py and b.text end up in this is some folder. So for every file, we fetch it, we put it in this folder. Now let's say we want to fetch from a different folder. Let's say I want to bring my files from pack here, c.py and d.py, and stick them in that folder. Well, we can use the from parameter, and we'll say from equals pack/. I think this will be fine. The fetch configuration, oh, there's no file called a.py because there's no file called a.py in that folder. I'll use c.py and what I say, d.py, d.py. And we'll see now, so what we've done is load the files from pack/c.py, the URL, right, the relative URL, pack/c.py and pack/d.py, and downloaded them to the local file system. This is some folder, c.py. This is some folder, d.py. So for every file in files, fetch from the relative URL, which is pack, which is the from string plus that file, and send it to a local file, which is to folder plus that file. It's a little bit verbose, but if you think about the pseudocode that would generate this, like, a for loop literally is take this string and append this, download it to this string plus append this, right? It's not terribly complicated. And like I say, you can have multiple of these in the same pyconfig. So for example, if I wanted to fetch those files to a folder and also fetch a.py, so yes, a.py needs to be a list of files. And I walk this. Now we see our first fetch configuration fetched 2 files from that pack folder and stuck them in this is some folder, and then fetched the A file. And because I didn't provide from or to folder, it just stuck them in the current working directory. And now I have a.py. This is some folder C. This is some folder D, right? So you could end up stacking many of these to get the structure that you want. But this is the power of fetch configurations. Specifically, this was meant to handle the situation of loading structured packages from the web, right? Because previously, when we were just loading everything into the current working directory, we are destroying package structure, which was not super great. But now, if I've done my package structure right, you can see with this fetch config where I load init and C and D from pack and to pack, right? And I should end up with what looks like our same package structure as we have in our file browser over here. I should be able to say, unless I've messed this up, and this is the challenge of live demos, from pack import C. Let's see if that'll not throw up on me for sure. And now I have a function defined in C, print c.c. I should be able to just module pack.c has no attribute C. Oh, it's because I called the function A, because I was doing a little bit of copy and pasting when I was prepping this. So in c.py, I have this function, did someone say C, which is the function C. And so now by being able to import these files in a structured way that preserves their folder structure, I am able to now import them as structured packages the way we would like to, using this notation or dotted notation, right? Should be able to do from pack.c, import capital C, our function, and I should be able to print C. We'll see if I've got that right. Yeah, there we go. So now all this folder structure can be preserved, and we can load structured packages in PyScript. How cool is that? I promised we would come back to the toFile parameter, which I said was a slightly different beast. And let me show you what it is for. So let me clear out a little bit of this. We'll clear out our imports. We'll leave our walking through the local file system, because I think that may be a useful illustration. So files and toFile, the toFile parameter, are mutually exclusive. If you say load files a.py to foo.py, and you don't have a typo, like missing an equal sign, I believe it will throw up on you. Yes, so it says a py error 1000 cannot use toFile and files parameters together! Exclamation point. We can't do it. And this is because these are two sort of distinct ways of specifying where the file data should end up. What this toFile parameter is meant for is in our, bring back our previous fetch configuration, in our metaphor of fetching data from a URL that's structured like a folder and a file to a place that's like a folder and a file, what happens if the data we're fetching from, right, with the URL we're fetching from, doesn't look like a folder plus a file? Right? What if we don't have a way of saying that, this folder, this path on a URL corresponds to some file listed within it? A lot of times it will, right? That's a common way if you are using a server to serve files, right, to the website and you are downloading them to your PyScript. The URL path will look like a file path, but it's a URL, so it doesn't have to. So that's a situation where you might use toFile. So if I use a path like from pack/c.py, as Siri is desperately trying to tell me something here, and I say toFile, I'm going to choose a local file. This is local.py. And if I've gotten this right, so what we've done here is now we've taken the contents of c.py and we've given it a fully qualified file name to download to. So if this from parameter could be any URL, including an API endpoint, including a query, or something that reaches out to a database. This, in a situation where you don't have a .py file to reference, being able to fully specify the name of the actual file you want it to download to is really useful. And this is genuinely the same Py file, so I can say from this is local, import that same C function as earlier, and do print C, and then it should just work. Did someone say C? There's our function. So that function is on my server, right? It's being served these files in my file system as c.py. But in my local file system, I'm downloading it to the Inscription file system as this is local. And again, this is really meant for the case where your URL doesn't look like a file path that looks like an API endpoint or something that doesn't structured that way. Hey, morning, Fabio. Hey, it's morning for me here in Chicago. I'm not sure it's morning for you. But thanks for stopping by. I think this will be a good time. We're just chugging through fetch configurations, which as you can tell I'm fanboying about a little bit because I think they're really cool and really, really powerful. So there, I should have said at the beginning, but there is a blog post linked in the description of this stream/video, which is my write-up on everything that's new in 2022 12.1. The pseudocode for how fetch configurations work is in there. So if my verbal descriptions and illustrations aren't doing it for you, that, which is essentially Python code, which walks you through sort of the decision tree of how these choices get made with files, from and to folder and to file, is sort of spelled out there. So that may fit your brain better than this illustration. So that is an option you have if you want it. That's fetch configurations. Super powerful tool and really exciting. Let's move right along to the Python API. More big changes in 2022 12.1. And again, I'm going to do this in comparison to 2022 9.1. Fabio says it's 4 p.m. here and almost dark. Oh no! Yeah, the sun is just rising here, but I think it's already setting there, which makes a lot of sense. Yeah, part of the reason for normally in when I've previously done live streams, they've been at about 10 o'clock my time, p.m., which would not really work for y'all over there. Maybe you're a night owl. So let's see here. What were we? Oh, Python API. Yeah. So in 2022 9.1, there was a sort of interesting way of getting the PyScript API, the parts of PyScript, things like display, like element.write, which is a way of writing to elements in the DOM. Basically, all of these things were sort of automatically included in your namespace whenever you started a PyScript tag, as well as a bunch of standard lib modules, 5 or 6 different ones, including, I think, datetime. So I could say print datetime.now. Let's see if I'm forgetting exactly which ones are in here. Let's see. I believe it's datetime.now. I believe the datetime module was one of the ones that was automatically included. Or things like, here, let's do print dir async.io. Right, that's the entirety of our PyScript, because I know async.io was included here. Yeah, so these are all the methods for the async.io standard lib module, but you notice we didn't have to import async.io. It was kind of imported for us by secret, just kind of as a byproduct of the way that the PyScript standard library was being executed in the global namespace as PyScript loaded. Regardless to say, this was not ideal. You had a lot of things in the global namespace that you really didn't need. In fact, if I just do print dir, I'll blow this up a little bit. Here's all the various names that are already cluttering up your global namespace in 2022 9.1 that you didn't really need. We have the base64 library, we have this output manager, and render is all sort of shenanigans. So if we jump back over to 2022 12.1, and I just do print dir, I'll blow this back up a little bit here. We can see still a fair number of things are still built in here. And in fact, it looks a lot like the same list. But let me show you what happens if I do print dir async.io. I might have to switch over to display just to get lime wrapping. Yeah, let's do display dir async.io. And we will say, so we have this interesting deprecated global message showing up in here, which is something that Antonio put together, which is a way of saying, so let's say I just try, because previously Oh, Fabio, it should be lowercase if it's included datetime. Thanks, Fabio. This is why I need people here who can remember exactly what the syntax is in real time. If you try and use one of the names that was previously automatically included for you, let's see. If it really is double lowercase here, let's see if this will work. Yeah, cool. So this code, this print datetime.datetime now, which you could do in 2022 9.1, will still work for you in 12.1, but it will also show you this cool deprecation warning. Direct usage of datetime is deprecated. Please use import datetime instead. Basically, we've taken most, not quite all, but most of the symbols that were automatically imported for you in 9.1. And now they still are imported, but they are wrapped in this deprecation warning saying, hey, really, we don't want to be importing all these things for you. You really should be importing all of these modules yourself. So if I do that, if I import datetime like a good little Python writer, then our deprecation goes away and our function just works as intended. This is true sort of across the board for both names that were in modules or standard lib modules, parts of the Python API. So if I say v equals element hello, which is an element constructor, which would reference something like a div called hello, I believe. Oh, interesting. Oh, so element and display are automatically included for you. I think the PyScript object is too. This is all in that reference blog post that I was saying a moment ago. It's something you should definitely check out here. In fact, I'm going to look at it myself. What did we take out of here? Things like the web loop. So x equals loop. So this is a reference to the pyodide web loop that does async IO handling. Are things like that. We can also, I believe, the JS console was commented out. Yeah, so if you want to reference the JavaScript console, which you could import as js.console, that's still there. You can still just do console.log, but you really should be doing from JS import console, import it as a whole new symbol, and then use it that way if you want to get rid of that deprecation warning. So these deprecation warnings are really cool. They will basically tell you, hey, we're not going to import that for you in a future version. Get your own import statements in there. So that's really a thing worth doing. The other thing that the sort of restructuring that came along, with this and introduced these deprecation methods is that as we saw earlier, the PyScript.py file is now in our local file system to start. This is going to allow us to not only say things like from PyScript import display, if we want it to be, a display hello world. If we want to be explicit about importing that. Oh, it helps if you spell it helps if you spell the name of PyScript correctly, I suppose, on your PyScript stream. So now we can explicitly import our symbols from PyScript.py, which is really nice. But also, we have the ability to import that PyScript.py module into other Python files that are living in our system. So let me show you something that is possible in 2022 9.1 that wasn't possible it is possible in 12.1 that wasn't possible in 9.1. In an ancillary Python file, let's say a.py here, which is not super interesting. Previously, there was no way to say, define a function. Let's say def print hello world. Let's call it display hello world, because that's going to be more accurate. Display hello world, display hello world. And then in our pyconfig here, we'll use a fetch configuration to fetch the files a.py. All right, so we'll bring them into the local file system, but then if I want to say from a import display hello world, cannot import display. Oh, it helps if I save my file, I suspect. Let me blow this up a little bit here. So it imports just fine, right? But if I try and call my function display hello world, I imagine I will get an error because the symbol display is not defined within a.py. And previously, there was no way to give a.py access to that function. But now in my external file, I can just say from PyScript import display. Right? And now, because display.py is present in our local file system, any other file that we bring into our file system has access to that PyScript module. Now, there are some edge cases where this is not necessarily possible, and we are sort of working through these as a team. One would be if we have sort of our structured packages here that we are using in a different folder. If we have... if I print out our local file system again, if I have a.py here, or really here, let's put our a.py in a folder using a fetch configuration, which you are all experts on now. Packed/big. If I put my a.py into that folder, there's not, as far as I know, a really clear way. Well, now I've broken my imports here. Let's just comment that out. There's not a great way for, in the file a.py, to import from a parent, a module in a parent folder in a clean and structured way, I don't think. You could treat this whole folder as a package and import it that way, but there's some thought that maybe things like display and element actually want to become part of the built-ins within the PyScript environment, so you can call them from anywhere. In any case, it's not perfect yet, but it is really cool that you can now actually write multiple Python files that rely on the internals of PyScript, like display, like element, and use those to expand the functionality of Python within PyScript. So progress there, and things are only getting better in the future, which is really cool. One more little thing that's getting really cool in PyScript, if I clean up my window a little bit here, is version numbers. So from the Python side, again, if I do for d in dir print d, we'll get a list of just sort of our global names that we have. Oops. For d in dir print d, sort of the objects in our global namespace, we'll see our PyScript object here. If we do print dir PyScript, PyScript has a couple of new attributes here, in addition to a lot of the sort of internal mechanisms, which you really shouldn't mess with, called version info and dunder version. So if I do print PyScript.version info, we'll see that version info is a named tuple with a year, month, minor, and release level for this release. So if you are writing code that depends on some feature of the current release, for example, display, you now have sort of a canonical way to identify what version you are running in. You can use PyScript.versionInfo to figure out what version of PyScript you're in and sort of base your behavior on that, especially as the API gets fleshed out, right? The behavior of some of these functionalities might shift or change slightly. If you need to sort of, adjust your code based on a PyScript version, PyScript.versionInfo is the way to do it. There is also PyScript.dunderversion, which is a more human-readable version of the same string. So if you just need to print out you are in PyScript version 2022.12.1, use dunder version. If you're doing comparisons, like if you're going to say, if my version year is greater than 2023 and month is greater than 5, you should be using version info, which is a named tuple, which just make the comparison that much easier. Yeah? We'll come back to version numbers in a little bit when we talk about the JavaScript module for PyScript, which is very exciting. But in the meantime, I want to talk about plugins, which are super duper cool. They're a relatively recent addition to the code base, so it's possible I will get some details of this wrong, and they deserve their own whole video or stream regardless, because they are going to be, I think, a super powerful part of PyScript going forward. The gist of writing a plugin is that you write a Python file, and we can try and do one now, p.py. I'll say from PyScript import plugin, to import this plugin class, and we'll write our own plugin that extends that. So we'll say class dummy plugin pass. And then we'll need to create inside this plugin file an object called plugin, which takes the constructor of our plugin class and then a name to reference it by, dummy plugin. And then what I can do to include that plugin, I'm just saying the word plugin over and over, like, Jeff, this is not useful, this is just sort of structure, and I get it, but let me do some setup here, and then I'll show you how it works. So I'll say plugins equals p.py, and this is a URL, so you don't need to include this in your fetch configuration. This is a URL, not a path to a local file, at least for now. We'll see if that changes. When you use this structure, what you are doing is, I think, let's see, it probably is not showing up anywhere here because that plugin is not actually doing anything. But we'll see that in our PyConfig registration up here, it's registered a plugin called p.py. And that plugin will automatically have its member functions called if their names match any of the lifecycle hooks that PyScript describes. Now, I will be totally honest with you. This is a really cool function. It's fresh, it's new, and it's changing a lot, so we don't have a ton of public-facing documentation on it yet, partly because it would change almost immediately. So this is more of a, like, I'm stoked about it for the future. Let me show you the gist of it. If you want to get into this, and you should, dive into the code base. But if you're like, where's the documentation so I can start on this, just know this is like a fresh baked bun out of the oven, and we might put it back into bake more before we get good documentation out. Just saying. But if our dummy plugin class defines a number of lifecycle methods, like configure is one of them, I happen to know. I can say print configuring dummy plugin. And I think this will work. Now, this is the thing, I have to go look up our lifecycle methods now. But that's all right. That's what these streams are for. I will just open up the PyScript code base. And I can actually, I'll show you where to look if you're interested in diving into these for yourself right now. Inside the, it helps if I show you the actual code, huh? It won't be the last time I make that mistake. Inside of our code base in PyScript.js in plugins, let's see, what's going to be the best way to do this here? Let's look in our PyScript.py file. So this is the file PyScript.py, which is imported into the local file system when, that we saw in the file system earlier in PyScript. And if I search for plugin, so here's our plugin class. All right, the plugin class is nothing terribly fancy. It just sort of adds itself to the list of Python plugins. Also has this decorator function for creating custom HTML tags if we want to. But if we look in our main plugin.ts file, we can see the list of all of the methods which are called on plugins at certain points in the PyScript lifecycle. So we have configure, before launch, after setup, after startup. Let's see. Now, not all of those are necessarily valid for Python plugins, right? Because we can't run a Python plugin until we've loaded the Python runtime, which happens a couple of steps into the loading of PyScript. So, for example, in plugin.ts, you can see before launch, which is calling before launch on TypeScript plugins, but not Python plugins. But if I were to do, say, the after setup step, so after setup is a function which takes a single argument called runtime. So if I go back to my code and say after setup, and we'll just have it swallow all of its args. This is one of these things about doing these demos live. There's like a non-zero chance this just doesn't work. There we go. So we can see that during the after setup step of configuring PyScript, we ran our after setup function and actually printed out some content to the screen here. And to prove that it's happening at a certain point in the life cycle, I'm going to add to a PyScript tag print hello world. And we can see that this code inside the after setup function is actually being run before our actual PyScript tags are being run. Fabio says fetching plugins from a URL will be coming soonish. Ooh, very exciting. Yeah, Fabio's been doing some really cool work, but I mean, both in the documentation and also I know he's been digging into this plugin system, which I'm very excited about because you can sort of already tell these are going to be quite powerful, right? We could use this plugin is just printing some things to the screen, which is not super helpful. But this could be, doing some other parsing of the DOM. It could be modifying the content of PyScript tags themselves, right? Let's say you wanted to the plugin to look at all the PyScript tags on my page, and if any of them is using an async context manager, throw up a warning that that's not implemented yet, or something like that, right? You could do an AST manipulation. You could change the content of your tags based on what else is in the DOM, right? If I've loaded such and such a library, maybe a JS library, then add an import statement to the top of all of my script tags that imports that library from this source versus that source. We have these sort of ways of modifying how the page is working outside of just the PyScript tags themselves. The demo plugin that's sort of shipping with PyScript now is a Markdown plugin. So let me actually I'm back in the PyScript code base here. Let's see here. Just bring my display window back up here. If I go to our Markdown plugin and bring that up live, we'll see if this crashes because I don't have my build going. I may have to point this at 2022-12.1. Yeah. So we're going to point our JS links at https://pyscript.net/releases/2022-12.1/pyscript.js. The CSS will be fine. Oh, the CSS will not be fine. Hang on, let's fix that. I will take this moment as I'm copying and pasting to just give a personal opinion, which is that you should not be linking to the, quote, latest release. You should be linking to one of these pinned releases, right? So you can link to pyscript.net/latest/pyscript.css, for example. And that's fun for just playing around, but I would highly recommend that you link to one of these named and pinned releases, because if you were linking to latest, on Tuesday morning, we broke your website. We introduced display, we introduced changes in standard out, we introduced a whole new Python API, right? Like if you're linking to latest, you are giving Ted, our project manager, you are giving Ted permission to break your code at any time. And if that's your intention, if it's a throwaway experiment, that's fine. But I highly encourage you to link to a pinned version. I believe what's happening with our build error on the other side of the screen is just a path change in this example here. So let's see. I was hoping I could show this off, but it's sort of impromptu, but I think perhaps I am not going to be successful. Plugins, packages. Let's see if this. So with the point of this example here, and you can go to pyscript.net/examples and try it for yourself. In fact, maybe we can. pyscript.net/examples, which also has a fresh new look, which is really cool. I believe the Markdown example is not even here yet because it's so secret and experimental. This all it looks quite good, and Fabio, who's in the chat now, has been doing some good work here. In addition to in the examples page, there's now a really easy way to view the code that you're looking at. It's like, oh, hey, this is cool, but what actually is happening? You click View Code, and it shows you the PyScript tag. That's pretty sweet. I think that's a huge value add for understandability. We'll sort of abandon this demo for now, but the point is that this PyScript, this Py Markdown plugin, which other Fabio the Elder, wrote, allows you to create this custom PyMD tag, which allows you to convert Markdown in an HTML tag directly into HTML. Oh, there we go. I don't think I changed anything. Maybe I hadn't saved it. But you can see that this PyMD tag, which is being managed by the Py Markdown plugin that is written in this Python file, is taking this Markdown, this hashtag Markdown, hashtag Hello World, which is a title tag in Markdown, and converting that using the Python Markdown library into some HTML. So if you wanted to write your website in HTML or in Markdown and have it be directly converted to HTML in the browser, this would be one way to do it. Maybe not the cleanest way. There's lots of other build systems, but as a demo, this is really cool. Let's see. Name of the file. Maybe we'd go directly to it in the URL. Oh, yes, it's possible the examples are secretly on our website here, but now we've got this demo working, which is... Whew, this is why live demos are always exciting. But yeah, so you can sort of see the ability to write Python code which modifies the execution of PyScript in addition to modifying the way other things work on the page is going to be really quite powerful. And so I'm really excited for it. I can only wait to see what's coming down the pipe next. In fact, actually, speaking of the examples page, This is just a slight diversion, and then we'll talk about async IO. One of the things that other Fabio the Elder, I think, is currently working on is something like so. Let's pull up like our Altair example here from the PyScript website, which will load eventually. It'll take a little bit of time. We're generating graphs live in Python on the web, which is still really cool. And we have our view code button, and we can see how it's actually working, which is really nice. So, but this is a little bit inside baseball, but like one of the things, this view code functionality that Fabio R built in is really cool. The source code for it takes up a fair bit of space in the examples themselves, right? So if we go to something like our Hello World example, where am I? Oh, really? Oh, maybe I'm out of date in my PyScript library. Let's see here. Yeah, so here's a better example. Oh yeah, because I've overwritten Hello World like 6 times. So like here is the code that is running the anti-gravity demo, and here is all the code that's making that view code process possible, like adding the button to the page and giving it an event listener and like formatting it correctly. So, which is all well and good. Like, we do what we have to do to get the website working. But if you as a new user downloaded this example, there's just more content in this HTML file now. So Fabio the Elder had an idea, which is, what if we could use a PyScript plugin to basically dynamically generate this view code button for any given PyScript source? So essentially a plugin which looks at the PyScript tags on your page, and at page load, if it sees any PyScript tags, adds a view code button to the page with that code already in it, right? And then all of this functionality basically gets encapsulated inside a plugin that does it for you. So if you want to have PyScript running on your page and you want to have a view code button, you just add, I think he's calling it PyTutor. You just say, plugins equals PyTutor, and it will just add that for you. Right? How cool is that? Which is also, none of this is a dig on Fabio the Younger. This functionality of demonstrating the code that's running on this page is really vital. I'm just excited that we're gonna have this cool way in PyScript to give anyone that ability with a little configuration change. That's really cool. So that's, like I say, a real quick and dirty example of plugins, and it is evolving and changing, as Fabio R says. Ooh, Fabio uploaded that plugin PR. Yeah. Oh, I'm super excited. Did that get merged? I'm not gonna do a git pull live on stream. That feels like a step too far. But yeah, get excited about plugins. Come visit the codebase or visit the Discord that is linked in the description and check it out. It's only gonna get more powerful from here. So super cool. What's next? Oh, Async IO. Okay, this will probably be fast. Let's say. Let me come back. I'll tidy things up just a little bit here. So I'll come back to our dummy HTML page here, and let me close up some other things so that we're just seeing our code and our window. So in 2022 9.1, and our previous version, you could do kind of a wacky thing. You could just have your entire script tag be print hello, await, asyncio.sleep to print world. And this code, I mean, this is the entirety of the PyScript code. And if you look on the right of the screen here, you can see hello to world, right? We have this sort of sleep in the middle of nowhere here with an await. This naked await, this sort of top level await, is probably giving some people an aneurysm right now. It's what is this doing here? This shouldn't be possible. Long story short, it is no longer possible, but it's here for a very good reason, which is that if you've ever, say, in your terminal, tried to enter code like this, for here, I have a terminal here. I'll just say import asyncio, and I'll say await asyncio.sleep1. Await outside function is the first error. So we're not allowed to have an await statement outside of a coroutine, outside of an async def statement, but we can fix that. We'll say async def coro, await asyncio.sleep1, print hi, finish that off, and then I will say asyncio.run coro. And that just works. So what's happening under the hood here when you do asyncio.run is it is starting an event loop, right? Essentially a thread which is keeping track of time and what things need to be scheduled and scheduling this coroutine into it. I believe, so asyncio.run does this. I don't think asyncio.ensure future, which is another method of running coroutines, that will not automatically start an event loop, and it yells at me about it. It says there is no current event loop in the thread main thread, right? You haven't started this event loop that I'm going to need to use to keep track of time and what things should be scheduled when. You're going to have to start that event loop manually before using ensure future. In conversations with some of the Pyodide folks and Hood over there, in the browser window, we always have an event loop. In a sense, the browser window is an event loop. Right? We have this main thread, the idea of the JavaScript event thread constantly running. So why not make it possible for the users to not only just use something like asyncio.run to hook into that thread, but because we have an unambiguous event thread running all the time, we can let people just schedule things into the event loop whenever they want. We can do, allow them to throw this await asyncio.sleep here and let them schedule it as they please. This is a really interesting idea. It's a really cool idea, but it kind of plays havoc with the idea of what a PyScript tag is in a kind of fundamental way, right? Without this async statement, without this await statement, this is a Python script, right? It runs synchronously from top to bottom. Under the hood, the Pyodide runtime compiles it to an AST and a code object, and then calls exec on that code object and runs it. It's a Python script. With this await, this is now a coroutine. The entire script is a coroutine, which has to be scheduled into the event loop. And so the fact that a PyScript tag could be two separate things was really playing havoc with a lot of the logic and understanding of, for example, asking a simple question of when have all the PyScript tags completed running? When can we hide our loading screen here? Well, we'll hide our loading screen when all the PyScript tags are done. Well, if a script tag can be a script or a coroutine, and that coroutine might run forever, right? This was perfectly valid. I could say let's say while true, asyncio.sleep to print forever. It's okay. It's supposed to be bad code, so it's going to be deliberately bad, right? This was a perfectly valid thing to write in your PyScript tag, but now, how can we judge that script, like this script tag, has finished running? Right? It's not. It's running forever, and so there are other parts of the life cycle that are actually no longer running here. Like anything happens after script tag execution in 2022 9.1 would be broken by this. So having spent quite a while saying what was possible, let me show you the equivalent that is possible in 2022 12.1. Basically, we have removed the ability to have those naked awaits inside of your code. We haven't taken away any functionality, and I'll show you how to adapt in just a moment. But if you just say await asyncio.sleep to print world, we'll do a print hello to print hello. It should yell at you, yes, and it surely does. Which says we got a Pi 9000 error. Use of top-level await async for and async with is deprecated. Please write a coroutine containing your code and schedule it using asyncio.ensure future or similar. See this page in the docs for details. And that basically says it all. Rather than just sort of nakedly putting an await inside your PyScript tag, what you should be doing now is using async def to define a coroutine, and then using asyncio.ensure future to run it instead. And this makes sure that so all PyScript tags are now, as a tag, are synchronous, and you can use them to schedule coroutines, right? A PyScript tag is a script that will run from beginning to end without invoking the event loop, and you can use it to schedule coroutines into the event loop. That's a lot of ways of saying don't use top-level await, but I think it's important to put out there because a lot of a fair number of the examples, including a lot of the early ones based on the alpha version, were using that sort of naked await syntax, and the solution is just to wrap your previous code into a coroutine and schedule it. I like ensure future for scheduling these. You could also use create task from the asyncio library, which gives you a task handle, and if you think you might need to cancel a coroutine, that's probably the way to go. But either of them will work just fine. So that's all there is to really to say on async at the moment. If you're getting that Pi 9000 error that you can't use top level await, wrap your code into a coroutine, schedule it using ensure future or create task, and you'll be just fine. Yeah. All right. Give me 1 second here. And I will remember to unmute myself as well, which is always key. As we move on to, the JavaScript module. This is a fun one to talk about. This module came out of a couple of needs that people have been asking us for a long time. One is, for a long time, it was true, and it's no longer exactly true, that you could only run one instance of Pyodide in a browser window at one time. That's no longer strictly speaking true, although as Hood says, it is dangerous. So it's not a perfect system. But so if PyScript was running code using the Pyodide runtime, and you had some other module library, something that was trying to run using Pyodide, maybe Jupyter Lite or something like that, there was no way to share a Pyodide instance between them. And so we were asked could we expose the Pyodide runtime somehow? And additionally, there were some ways of bringing the objects and variables that are present in Python to be more exposed to the JavaScript side in a way that might be useful. Let me show you what I mean. What I will do, let's see here. I'll come back to our code view. Let's see here. So I'm going to show this off, I'm going to create a button that on click runs a function called, let's see. How do I want to run this demo? I didn't quite think this one through. Let us do PyScript.version. We'll do this as console.log. Console.log PyScript.version. Right, when I click this button. Click me to log. I'll blow this window up a little bit here. So now if I open my developer console and I click me to log, what I should see printed in my console log here is 2022-12.1, which is the current PyScript version. This PyScript object here is the JavaScript module that is the PyScript library. So if you need to access the PyScript module itself, the code base we were looking at earlier, we were digging through source, as a JavaScript object, it is now present in the browser as a module called PyScript. It has a couple of attributes so far, one of which is the version string. So if you need to get the version number of PyScript via JavaScript, this is certainly a way to. You can also get an access to the PyScript runtime, and the runtime is whatever runtime we are currently using to run Python code in the browser. By default here, we can see, and my head's not too much in the way here, I can see on my monitor. Currently, it's a Pyodide runtime, and we can see some of the attributes of it. It was sourced from this CDN, it's this version, and various things. There's also this globals object, which is super duper powerful. I don't know I think logging it is just going to give me a proxy, I suspect. Yeah, we get one of these PyProxy objects, which is part of the mechanism by which Pyodide sends objects back and forth between Python and JavaScript. But I can use this globals object, which is a reference to, get this, the globals dictionary in Python. So if I say name equals Jeff Glass inside my PyScript, and I do log globals.get name, and I have to use the other kind of quotes, right? I do PyScript.runtime.globals.get name, and I click to log, I get Jeff Glass. So this is one way of getting variables, getting objects really, from Python into JavaScript, is to use this PyScript.runtime.globals.get. You can also, I believe, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to do .set name. Does set take a... I actually don't know if it works. I never tried that before. But this is an easy way of getting objects out of Python into JavaScript. Also in this runtime, if I back up a little bit here and just log the runtime object itself, and we can look at some more of its parameters, we get this. So we looked at globals. We have config, which essentially is a copy of the pyconfig tag that we loaded it originally with. We have version and runtime and so on. We also have this interpreter, and this interpreter parameter is very much the underlying pyodide interpreter that we are using to run Python code, and we can use it just like any other pyodide instance. I could say PyScript.runtime.interpreter, if I've spelled it right, which I usually don't, .run. Let's do print. Oh, let's see. How are we going to do this? Import js.console.log dir. If I've gotten the things right. So what this is going to do is reach into the pyodide runtime directly and run a piece of Python code using JavaScript. PyScript.runtime.interpreter.run. It must be run Python. Run Python. Oops. Let's see here. What have I screwed up now? Parentheses was never closed. Yeah, the classic error. Let's see what I have screwed up here. So log. So we must need... let's see. Oh, we don't even need a console log here. So when we click this button, we're going to reach out to the pyodide interpreter inside of PyScript and ask it to run some Python, which imports the JS module and does console.log on it. Run Python. Runs dir js.console.log dir. So that's where the quote goes, and it goes here. Yes, I think I figured that out. Let's see if that actually works. So let's bring this up a little bit. There we go. That log hello from. Let's, instead of just doing dir, we'll do hello from Python. So we're running some Python code inside of JavaScript using the pyodide interpreter. I screwed it up again. This is one of those challenges with oh, because that's Python code. Jesus. All right, losing track of all of my quotes here. Let's give this one more try. So we'll use our backtick quotes to encapsulate our string here. And I don't need a quote there. Oh, I do need a quote there. Oh, jeez. Oh my goodness, now I've really broken it. Unexpected identifier me. hang on. We're going to get this right because I think it is really, really cool. So PyScript.run Python takes a string, hello from Python. What's tripping me up here is this is a string within a string within a string. Right, so I'm onClick equals PyScript.here. Let's bring this out into a function. So onClick equals foo, this function foo. And in a separate script tag, we will say function foo. And in that function, we'll do PyScript.runtime.interpreter.runPython. And that statement will do the following. It will run the Python code, import JS, js.console.log, hello world. Okay, hopefully this will be our last attempt at this. And what I've done is I've crashed my live server here that's showing things. I will say, hello world, there we go. So just to recap, now that I've gotten it right, we are using the interpreter property of the runtime of PyScript, which is this again. This is the pyodide interpreter itself, which has a run Python method. And I'm using that to run Python, triggered directly by JavaScript. So if you need to have JavaScript run some Python in PyScript, this is a way to do it. This is also basically just using pyodide, right? If your program starts to look more like this than things written into PyScript tags, you might want to just be using pyodide directly. Right, PyScript is at this point, it's a wrap around several runtimes. But if you need to use your JavaScript to trigger the running of specific Python code, you might have better luck just using pyodide. But that's totally fine. So that's the essence of the JS module. It has that version tag, and it has this runtime object, which has an interpreter object, which is the pyodide runtime if you need to access it directly, or if you want to share it with other JavaScript libraries that are running in the browser. You'll notice that I am using things like a button click or something like that to trigger this interactivity. And that's because this interpreter object isn't a valid attribute until PyScript has finished loading pyodide. So if I were to just say put this in a script tag, right, so it runs right away, oops, what you will see is, if I bring up our console a little bit bigger here, we should have an error right at the top. Yes, uncaught reference error, PyScript is not defined, right? So this script tag is running even before like PyScript has run, right? So that's clearly not going to work. But I think even if I do script defer, this is probably not going to work very well. Let's see here. Yes, uncaught reference error, PyScript is not defined. So really what we need to do is wait until the pyodide runtime is loaded, and then it is valid to use this. We will probably, if Antonio has his way, almost certainly, and I agree with Antonio, we're going to provide some kind of better functionality around this, maybe a callback. You say, await PyScript.load interpreter, and that gives you a promise which resolves the interpreter, so you don't have to kind of like guess when the runtime is valid or not, but that is something that we will be working on in future versions for sure. So that's the gist of the JS module. Just glancing over at my little monitor, I'm going to move my sorry, it's going to be distracting. I'm going to move my window so it's not covering my little flags there. All right, let's talk about tag deprecation. I'm going to close that up. I'm going to clean this up. And let's talk about some tags that we're getting rid of. So the original alpha version of PyScript included some additional HTML elements. I kind of like it. Included some additional HTML elements like PyTitle, PyButton, that did some interesting other things in PyScript, right? They were sort of ways of like trying to bring an HTML API into the Python world. A lot of this was like really the result of like a couple of sprints that some core members on the Anaconda team did, and they were really interesting. But as the PyScript API has been slimming down and getting closer to its final form and like really making sense, what we've realized is that things like PyTitle and PyButton, and I'm looking at my list of them so I don't forget any of these ones, PyBox and PyInputBox really are kind of unnecessary, right? They don't add anything that you couldn't do with PyScript and normal HTML tags, so we're taking them out of the API. And in fact, you'll see, I think Fabio R., I think you authored this PR, if memory serves, to do this deprecation, maybe a couple PRs. If you try and use PyTitle and PyButton, you get these nice deprecation warnings. The element PyButton is deprecated. Create a function with your inline code and use button PyClick equals function class equals PyButton instead. So basically, these are not removed yet, but we are just trying to explain like, hey, these are going to go away. Like, we don't need a PyTitle tag when an H1 or H2 tag is essentially the same thing. And we don't need a special PyButton function when we can just have a button with an event listener in PyScript. So we're trying to slim things down to make them easier to learn, and sort of narrow down to the core essential functionality of what PyScript is. So PyTitle, PyButton, PyInputBox, and PyBox, which PyBox was essentially just a div with some formatting on it. Those are all deprecated. They will be removed in a future version. If you try and use them, they, I believe, still work for now, but they are deprecated with a warning message. So if you see that, refactor your code, and you'll be safe for future versions. As predicted earlier, I did forget to advance the tag there, so oh well, what are you going to do? But moving right along to, this is a good segue to errors and warnings. Much like that error I just made, sometimes when you're writing code in Python, you will make errors. And the formatting of them is a lot better now. So if I expand my window here, not only do we have this like nicely formatted warning that these things are deprecated, but also our Python errors get nicely deprecated or get nicely formatted. So we have this nice red box, we have this nice like red text that appears at the top of the page. The warnings can be closed, right? So if you are doing some programming and you're deliberately using a deprecated function, you can always say, close your warnings with this X button. But now our errors that are happening have a much nicer formatting than just some text dumped into a page. This is also true in errors that happen in PyScript startup, right? So for example, if I have this malformed PyConfig, and I say x equals nothing, I get an error. It says the config supplied x equals is an invalid TOML and cannot be parsed. And it tries to give you an error message that is explanatory of what's going on. I think also things like you're no longer allowed to have, or you were never allowed to have, and now we're telling you about multiple PyConfig tags on a page. Now, if you try and do that, you get a warning: multiple PyConfig tags detected. Only the first one is going to be parsed. All others will be ignored. So just trying to be more helpful with our error messages to help users learn better and faster. The other thing you will see in these errors is error messages, or error numbers, I should say. So the idea here is that for a given class of errors, especially, and to be clear, these are errors with usage of PyScript, not in usage of Python, right? So if I have my script down here that says x equals 0 inside my Python, what I get is our usual Python traceback that's just sort of nicely formatted, right? 0 division error division by 0, right? That's still going to pop up in your browser. If I have malformed PyScript, if you have my PyConfig is bad, if I have some unknown attribute on a tag that shouldn't have it, I will get a PyScript error with an error number. And if you go to docs.pyscript.net in the reference section, and I'll blow this up a little bit here, we have a listing of all of the currently extant error numbers. The idea being that if you have an error with PyScript, you're like, what? I got a, users are more likely to say, oh, I got a 2004 error, PY 2004, what's that? And you can come to this error page, or someone in the Discord can point you to this error page and say, so what that's telling you is, you got a PY 0403, that's a 403 error in your fetch, right? Or you had a PY 1001, that is a fetch error when loading a Python package from Pyodide, right? Just to try and make it easier for people to communicate the issue that they're having, and for us to provide resources to say, oh, well, here's the 3 things that can probably cause your 1001 error, right? Just makes communication a little bit easier. Super cool progress. I know Fabio R. was involved in this quite a bit as well. It's like just trying to make the user experience for PyScript just better, cleaner, simpler, faster. One of the really cool things that's happened with like the improved error messages and improved deprecation process is now it's streamlining the development process. Before it was like, well, okay, well, we're going to deprecate that feature, and so we kind of write an error message and how that's not kind of going to work. Now we have a pretty standard function that we can just say, okay, this is deprecated. If they use it, show a warning. And that makes it a lot faster to say, oh, yeah, that feature's gone. We'll deprecate it and we'll remove it later. Because the process is less painful, we are more willing to make bigger changes. At least that's my perspective, right? That's just me. But that's what I see happening in the code base, and I think that's really cool. So that's errors and warnings. They're better. There's error numbers. They pop up on the page. They're really quite good. We've already showed off basically what we've wanted to talk about with PyConfig changes. In addition to fetch configurations and the new plugins keyword, there's been some other things that have been fixed, like it won't crash on invalid TOML, which it did in 2022 9.1, which is a real good improvement. I don't think it will currently. So because plugins can register arbitrary keywords, there was no detection of unused keywords in PyConfig yet. But there's some discussion of like having plugins register what keywords in PyConfig they want to use. And so saying something like, hey, this foo keyword has not been used anywhere. Did you mean, something like if you have something like if you have a fetch config instead of a fetch config, this will currently not throw any errors because it's possible for a plugin to use a fetch config or a fetch table array. But that I think is something that we'll look at in future versions, is how do we detect which of our configuration options are and aren't being used by PyScript and the various plugins, and give the user like a little warning like, hey, you probably made a typo here. Lots of other little improvements of PyConfig 2, mostly so that they don't crash on weird edge cases, is quite nice. That's basically it for PyConfigs. We looked at the docs just briefly a moment ago, but I do want to highlight them. They are at docs.pyscript.net. and that will point you to, by default, the latest version. So this is 2022-12.1. You can, by going to the address bar, and I know it's too small for you to see, and I apologize. If you go to docs.pyscript.net/version number, it will take you to the documents for that version. So for example, if you are maintaining a document or a project that was written in 2022-6.1, the June release, docs.pyscript.net/2022.06.1 is the documentation at the time of that release. So we're maintaining back versions of the documentation for future reference. If you just do docs.pyscript.net, it will take you to the latest, which is what most people are going to want, but it's there if you need it. Lots of cool new stuff in the docs. Uh-oh. Have you crashed my docs? No. Lots of cool new tutorials here. Using fetch has gotten some big improvement. I had a little hand in writing some of this. It's in the blog post, and here Madura also put in a bunch of work into doing into this. I think Fabio wrote the importing needed functions, like this whole how you import functions into your Python text. Has really gotten a lot of love. Setting up a PyDI runtime, writing content to the page tutorials. The references page has also gotten a lot better. Like we're trying to get references in, or documentation in for the various elements, PyConfig especially, because all these new parameters, that's really getting fleshed out. PyRepl, PyScript. Here we can see Dunder version and version info that we had before. Documentation for the display functionality that we talked about just earlier, right? Display takes, a bunch of values, possibly a target and possibly append, right? So docs.pyscript.net is your friend. It's not perfect yet. If you see something, you're like, hey, I see this feature being used but not documented, come leave us an issue on the GitHub, or frankly, write us a PR. We had a couple new contributors just this past week jump in and say, hey, this is a thing that's not documented, but I see it being used. Can I write you a PR for it? And it's like, yeah, of course you can. Just bring more people onto the project, right? I think writing documentation is a really cool way to jump into a project. It's also a really cool way to get to know a project, right? There's nothing that teaches you something quite so well as having to explain it to somebody else. So it's really cool to see new contributors come in and write some PyScript documentation. So I'm really enjoying that. Oh, Fabio says, I wrote it, but it was Antonio's idea. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, it's a lot. If I'm leaving somebody out of this, I should say, it's not deliberate. There's been such a team effort of ideas swirling around. It's been a really cool couple of months putting this version together. So credit to really everyone on the team for pushing this forward. Really cool things happening here in the docs. Next up, I want to talk briefly about the community calls and stuff that's happening in the PyScript community. One of which is PyScript has had a Discord started by a couple of folks back in May after the big keynote presentation. That Discord, which is linked in the description below, he said, being pretty sure that it's there during the live stream. If you're watching this on video, it's definitely there. That Discord is not just now a place for people to come and chat and ask questions about PyScript or Python and get help. It is also now the hub of communication for PyScript as an open source project. So all of the core developers, including those of us who are not a part of the team in Anaconda pushing this thing forward, all the core developers there and outside it are on that Discord every day. There's the little virtual stand-up that happens. People are like, hey, I was working on this yesterday. Today I'm going to work on this. Happens in a room inside that Discord. So if you want to know what's going on with PyScript, in a very immediate way, what people are working on, what's breaking, what's changing, come join the Discord. It's really cool. People asking for help in various things, people finding issues, right? Just yesterday, I think, user tuxprint found a thing where the minified version of the JavaScript module was working different from the full version, which shouldn't happen. Reported it, found it, PR, it's in, it's merged, 24 hours. It's absolutely in, which is super cool. It's cool to see this sort of operating in public that's happening with this project. Selfishly, as someone in that community spirit, it's really helpful just to have everyone sort of in the same swirling space, having these discussions, and just saying hey, here's what I'm imagining for this idea. Is that what everyone else was imagining? It's plugins is a perfect example of this. The team had 3 different ideas about what the word plugins meant. And they're all basically making their way into the project. They're not in conflict with each other. We just needed to have sort of a public conversation about it, which was really cool. Oh, hey, Tuxprint's here. Hey, thanks again. I was just this is a cool open source moment. Someone was like, hey, I noticed this issue. There's a place to go for like to ask a question. There's people there who can like dig in and like play with it, and then we can get the fix into the code base. And it just happens. Like, that's the dream, right? Is that like there's enough conversation and like, you know, people just around to like make things better. I don't know. I just thought it's really cool. And I love the community that's building there, from people who are just starting Python, to people who are like really digging in and being like, okay, I have this, you know, long-standing JavaScript framework. How do I integrate it with PyScript, which is super cool. And frankly, often beyond my abilities, but there's other smart people there who are, you know, able to help with that kind of thing. So yeah, really cool community. Come and join the Discord is the pitch. We've had a couple of community calls. We had one in October. We had one in November. I don't know if we're having one in December, just with the holidays and everything. Basically, just like a public Zoom call with the core team. And anyone else who wants to join to talk about like what's happened in PyScript, what's happening next, what people are working on. Hash out occasionally some issues in public, although, you know, a big 10 or 12 or 20 person Zoom call is not necessarily the best format for like brainstorming or discussion solving. But those have been really cool. There's also talk about doing those. So they have been on Zoom, like hosted on an Anaconda Zoom room for the past couple times. It's possible in the future versions they will be via Discord, which has video chat, just because that's where the community is. Not sure exactly what's happening there. It's not really my bag, like to deal with. I like them a lot. Don't get me wrong. Someone else is solving that problem, so I don't know what the solution is going to be. But they will be announced on the Discord, so come check them out there. Which is going to be really nifty. What else in the community vein? Fabio R., who is here, and Paul Everett and myself are now officially maintainers, core members of the PyScript team. That happened like back in early October, so it feels like 100 years ago. But it was, I don't know, it's really nice. It's like, it's fun to have my name on that website next to like Fabio and Paul and, you know, and other Fabio and Antonio. It's really cool. It's really it's been a great community to be a part of. I'm really very gratified to have my little name on that list. Just looking over here at my outline to make sure I'm not missing anything that's happened in the community, because it's been a couple months since our last release, just making sure I don't forget anything. Oh, we got to talk about awesome PyScript. That's the next thing on our thing. Yeah. So the awesome PyScript is, and I'll just bring it up because it's really cool. So Awesome PyScript, or the PyScript Collective, which is the name of the GitHub repository, is a place where, and here I'll bring it up on the screen here. Oops. I'll bring it up on the screen here. There it is. The PyScript Collective page, or called Awesome PyScript, is a collection of awesome resources for doing things with PyScript that people have done, that people have made, that people have built. Worth checking out if you're looking for inspiration, if you're looking for what's possible in PyScript. You know, this cool like pandas cheat sheet for making graphs in different graphing libraries in real time, so demoed on the web with PyScript. Like, this was super cool. Anyway, worth checking out just to see what's possible. I know Paul and others are working on some other ways to share the cool things that are happening in PyScript. So, I'm excited to see what comes out of that effort in the next umpty amount of time. It's cool secret squirrel things are happening there. So I'm excited for him and all of his work and the rest of the team that's working on that. And then also, this one has died just a little bit, but I will mention it. There's also now this PyScript research repository. If I go to the PyScript organization and go to, let's see here, PyScript, scrolling past the private ones, research. This has some proposals for various major modifications to the PyScript ecosystem, so to say. So it was a new proposal around like revamping the events hook system entirely, and things like that. So this is open and available. This is not a secret branch. It's just like various experiments in here that if you want to come and check out some cool things that people are doing, this would be the place to come and check it out. So I don't know, go check it out. I know my last tag here is going to be called What's Next. I am just going to scroll briefly through this giant blog post that I wrote for myself, just to make sure I haven't missed anything. Okay, so to recap before we move on to the future, we have talked about here we go. We have talked about display and getting content to the browser. We've talked about fetch configurations, that super cool new way of getting files into the Inscription file system. We talked about changes in the PyScript API and all those symbols that are no longer imported and that you can now import from PyScript directly. We talked a bit about plugins, which are, as I said, still a work in progress, but very, very cool. So get excited. We talked a little about Async IO and implicit coroutines. We talked about the JavaScript module, right, and the ways you can access the pyodide runtime from JavaScript now. We talked about the fact that PyScript has version numbers now that you can get on the Python or the JavaScript side. All the cool new warnings and errors that are provided, including things like deprecation warnings for those 4 different kinds of tags that have now been deprecated. We talked about the documentation pages and the new tutorials that are there. And we talked about community. We talked about the Discord. We talked about the community calls that we had, some new maintainers, the research GitHub repository, and all that. I think that is all the news from the past, so I will just take a little bit more of your time to talk about what's coming up next. And none of this is, I think, secret and spoilers because we're talking about it in the Discord all the time. So like none of this is secret. And this is also, I will totally say, this is just my perspective on what's coming up next. It's sort of based on what's swirling in the air. I am sure that others have definite ideas of where they would like to see things go next and what they are already working on for things to go next. So you know, this is just one man's perspective on what feels like it's coming down the pipe. So don't hold me to this or be disappointed or mad if things don't come to pass. But just to really quick sort of run down a few options. One of the challenges of working with JavaScript in the browser, and of course now working with Python in the browser, is you have a single thread. You have one thread to do everything on, and if you block that thread, which is really easy to do in Python, you say, while true, do something, the entire UI locks up, right? You can't even interact with anything on the page. You can't even close the tab because that singular thread is crashing. So and here I will crash some code for you. So if I come over here in my PyScript tag, make sure I'm still got my visibility up over here, and I say while true, don't insert a paragraph tag, pass. So I have my loading screen over here, loading. And it's just going to load forever. And not only can I can't even right click on it, open the inspector, development console. I'm going to have a hard time closing this tab, I think. Yeah, you can see it right there at the end. It crashed. And that's the only reason I was sort of allowed to close it. So this is a problem from a user experience. This is not great. This is the equivalent of like in your console, you would hit, break Control C probably. You'd break out of your terminal, you'd figure out where you had your infinite loop and you start again. Right now, there isn't the equivalent of that in PyScript, right? This is just sort of the user experience you get if you accidentally loop forever, or if you have, a very long running script. I guess I should have gotten rid of my infinite loop before I reloaded the live server, but that's fine. This is something like I was talking about with Ted, our project manager, the other day. In the Discord, was saying like he's doing the Advent of Code project where you solve a coding challenge every day, and for some of these sort of naive sort of first solutions, that solution might take minutes, right? And all you see on your page at that point is this swirling loading screen with no indication that anything's actually happening, and that's just not good user experience. So what do? Well, one of the solutions we think is going to be to actually run the Python in a web worker, which is a way that modern browsers are coming to allow computers to run processes in an external thread and use messages to pass the results back to the main thread. It's not entirely trivial because that main thread is the only one who has access to the DOM directly, or access to the web page itself. So if you want to have sort of a clean way to interact with the web page, you need to figure out a signaling mechanism to get your information back and forth from the main thread to these web workers, these other threads. But it's really powerful because they run in a separate thread in the background. So you can sort of delegate the running of your code to a web worker, allow it to finish while your UI is still working, nothing's crashing, and then bring the result back. Lots of work to be done there, and there are several people on the team working on that, which will be really interesting to see where that goes. But I think it's really powerful. We're really excited to see what the experiments in that actually look like. Like I say, no promises, no guarantees. I just know there's a lot of people experimenting with this right now, so we'll see where that goes. 'Cause I think it could be a really powerful way to make the user experience better. What else? Scoped tags. So this is one that's near and dear to my heart. So right now, if you have, let me bring my code view back up. If you have two PyScript tags in a page, you have PyScript and PyScript. And in the first one, I say x equals 2, and the second one, I say print x. This just works, right? This works just fine. These PyScript tags are in the same namespace. They share the same, literally within Python, their globals dictionary is the same dictionary. It's one big dictionary, which for a lot of reasons is convenient, and is the same way that like a standard JavaScript script tag works. So I say let y equal 2, and if I have a separate script tag, I say console.log y, right? Then when I bring up my console log over here, I get 2, right? 2 separate script tags, same scope, 2 separate PyScript tags, same scope. This is fine if for a lot of use cases and very convenient, but when you start having a situation where you have many script tags on a page, or perhaps where you have a framework where script tags are being included automatically as part of a build system, or maybe you have a reactive system where components are coming in with their own script tags, and suddenly you have a component that is running that says, if x equals 2, print x, and you have, a common variable name. You have, if x equals 3, if x equals 3, print x. And these might be entirely disparate tags on your page. Perhaps they're connected to function calls, various things, but you can end up accidentally having namespace collisions is the point, because you have this shared namespace across the entirety of the page. This is something that is, like I say, near and dear to my heart as someone. I'm also doing the Advent of Code challenge. And so at jeff.glass, which is my website, you can check these solutions out if you want to. But basically, currently I have 20 pieces of PyScript code that you can run now if you want to, but each of these bits of code and some additional ones, right, that handle the visualizations for the days that have them, have to use either distinct variable names, or they have to sort of wrap everything in a function to create a closure around the local variables in that solution, right? And I cannot tell you how many times I have gone on to, part 2 of a day's problem and run into an issue because I'm reusing a perfectly reasonable variable name, like, I don't know, let's pick an example, like a character value, right? Which is the score of certain letters in a string for this day's challenge, right? But in part 1, the value of each letter is slightly different than in part 2, and in my source, these are in 2 separate .py files, so it feels like they should be in separate namespaces. But if I use the source equals attribute to bring them into separate PyScript tags, suddenly they're in the same namespace, right? So if you do, let's see here. I'm not being able to demo this super duper quickly, but the point is having script tags that share a namespace is convenient, but often problematic from a reusability standpoint. So there is discussion underway to think about how would we give users the option to run their script tags, their PyScript tags, in separate namespaces, and what the cleanest way to do that is, what the most Pythonic way to do that is. Does it interact with the source equals parameter in a way? Like, does that help us communicate what namespace we might be executing in? Well, ideally, and I'm a strong proponent of this, allowing users to still share namespaces, because that allows you to sort of put your code close to where the functionality on the page is. Anyway, this is all. I'm deep into this because I had at one point in like June authored a PR that sort of took a naive approach to creating namespaces, which had its lots of flaws. And me and Fabio the Elder and Antonio went like round and round for like 40 comments about what the solution was. Ultimately we said the Python API is evolving, PyScript is evolving. Let's shelve this for now and come back to it. I'm excited to come back to it. So that'll be quite fun. Another couple of things, the events API might be changing, and this might be actually a good time to illustrate it for people who have not seen it yet. I am going to bring up my code window one more time here, in case you haven't seen PyScript's events as it currently exists. So in my PyScript tag here, I'm just going to get a little window out of the way on my side. If I have a PyScript tag and I say, I'd create a Python function called print hello world. Let's have it swallow its arguments. We'll say print hello world. Right? If I want to create an object in the DOM that calls that function, there is a easy way to do it. I can say maybe create a button, and it's going to have a PyClick attribute that is going to be the string of Python that I would like to execute. Say print hello world. And I'm going to label this button click to say hello. We'll see if this works, and then I will explain it. I'm initializing web components. So the fact that this spinner is spinning forever, I have a feeling I have an error. Let's open our console and see what the error is. Here we go. Oh, very good. Uncaught type error. Button must have an ID attribute when using PyClick attribute. Well, that feels like a thing we can solve. So in my button here, I'll say ID equals button. We'll try that. And now when I click this button, we run our function print hello world. This click here, PyClick, could be any of the browser events, well, almost any of the browser events that we could have. So for example, if I do py mouse over, then we are going to sort of automatically add an event listener to this button that when I mouse over it, you can see there, it just runs our print hello world function. And actually that's true whenever I mouse over it, I can get all the hello worlds that I possibly want. This covers, like I say, most of the browser events. It's not necessarily all of them because they are sort of specified manually in the code base now. There's been discussion of like, it would be great if in a given browser window, we could get a list of all valid events and do this dynamically. Haven't done it yet, but there's a PR out there about it. I think there's a issue out there about it. And if someone wants to make a contribution to the PyScript code base, this would actually be a really cool first project for you to take on. The other thing that's true is that unlike something like JavaScript's onClick attribute, the Py event attributes are only calculated at page load. So if you dynamically add PyClick or PyMouse over to an attribute, it won't add that event listener. Although at that point, you can add an event listener manually from within PyScript. And for those who haven't seen that, let me just real quickly, in the most recent version, let's say from pydide.ffi.wrappers, import add event listener. You might see from JS import add event listener from previous versions of Pyodide. Pyodide now has these wrapper functions, add event listener, remove event listener, and so on, which they manage the lifetime of the Python objects inside of JavaScript for you, so it's good to use them when you can. Let me just, oops, sorry, I'm managing many a window over here, and I've accidentally closed a thing that tells me that the stream is still live. So if you're hearing me, then you know it's right, but I need to make sure that it's still working. There we go. So with this add event listener function, what I could do is say, if I wanted to add an event listener to an HTML element dynamically, what I could say is, I've def hello world here, and then I could say add event listener. An add event listener takes 3 parameters. It takes a DOM element, it takes an event, and it takes a callable. So I could say import JS. And I could say js.document.get element by ID button. I believe its second parameter is the event, so in this case, click, and then print hello world. So if you are needing to, let's see. Perhaps you forgot a comma. I probably did. Yes, I did forget a comma. Thanks, PyScript. Takes that click element. So yeah, so this would be the way that you would dynamically add or remove event listeners from an object after initialization. You could use Pyodide's add event listener or remove event listener functionality. With this, you pass it a proxy of a DOM element, you pass it the event you want to listen to, and you pass it your callable that you want to call when that event happens. Worth mentioning, this is a long way of saying this may all be changing. There is some discussion about, like, is this PyClick, PyEvent syntax the best one? It has some advantages and disadvantages. One of the disadvantages is that unlike something like onClick, where you could say onClick equals console.log this, where this refers to the button object itself. Currently, there is no way to do that within there is no reference to this inside the PyScript, the event handler that PyScript receives. Now, your event callable, if you use this syntax, if you use this add event listener, you will get a reference to that event, right? So this args is swallowing that event currently, but you will get a reference to it. So if you're using add event listener, you can get the event. If you're using PyClick, right, which is ultimately just taking a string of Python to execute, there is no way to say within this string, this, right? You couldn't say print this. It's just, it doesn't currently work. So that is one flaw. So there's some other proposals around the ways that you could sort of Pythonically create event listeners that respond to DOM elements. So that might be changing soon. So there's a couple of proposals over in the research repo that are talking about that. So if you want to check out what's happening there, check out the research repo. And then the last thing that I think is likely to continue to change and evolve is the Python side of PyScript itself. We have this new display functionality, which is really quite cool. That may get expanded or clarified some. There's a tutorial up on docs.pyscript right now for element, the element class that represents a DOM element within PyScript, and the element.write method, which is one way of writing content to the DOM, which is pretty good. There's some funky things about that API personally, in my opinion. Like if you want the underlying DOM element itself, you take your element and access the element attribute of it, right? So you might say something like, here, I'll show, I don't have to say it out loud. I can show you. I can say, let's see, button equals element button, right? Was going to get the element with ID button. But if I wanted to access so you can see I say my element object at this point in memory when I print it out. But if I wanted to change some property of it, actually I should do button.element here, let's do print button.element.styles. I don't know, this is probably going to give me an HTML list. Ooh, button.element.id. There we go. And the ID itself is button. So this, like, getting the element property of an element class is like just a little bit odd. I mean, it works. It works perfectly fine. It's just like, there's probably some parts of this. There's definitely some parts of this that are wanting a refresh as the API gets more condensed, right? So in future versions of PyScript, I suspect we will see this API get streamlined, get clarified, probably shrink in many ways. That's sort of been the movement in the past few months, is like PyScript is really honing in on what are the core bits of functionality that need to be really strong and really clear to allow people to build their functionality on top of it. And if it's not really strong and really clear, maybe it's not a part of the PyScript core. Maybe it's a part of something that's built with PyScript or on PyScript, right? And that's what a lot of the work around clarifying the API or building with plugins or various things is, to allow PyScript as a foundation for doing other things with, rather than trying to be the be-all end-all solution in and of itself, if that sort of makes sense. And that's really exciting. This is something that was said during the October community call quite a bit, is like PyScript doesn't want to be a framework, right? In the sense that a frame of a photo surrounds the photo and defines its boundaries. If you see a painting in a museum and you see the frame and the painting shall not go outside of it, modern art accepted, right? PyScript doesn't want to be a framework. PyScript wants to be a platform upon which you can stand and upon which you can build additional layers of functionality. And so a lot of the work now is going into figuring out how can PyScript be a strong, stable, it's not stable yet, a strong, secure platform for creating Python applications on the web in a way that doesn't limit what others can build on top of it. And I think that's really cool. That's all that's new in PyScript 2022 12.1. I mean, I say that's all there. We're like 200 merges in this release and commit. If you want to see the detailed change log, there's a link at the top of that blog post which goes through every single change. So much has gotten tweaked and fixed and corrected. You know, a crash nipped out here, an off by one error there. So much has gotten clean, but these are the big changes that are coming along and the changes that are coming next. So thank you for joining me on this morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, for what's new. I hope you have a swell rest of your December season. We'll see what's coming up in the next release and on this channel. I would like to do that. We've just sort of scratched the surface of what you can do with fetch configs and the display functionality and with PyScript interactions. So I'd like to do more videos and streams on this channel to talk with you more about what you can do with the functionalities of PyScript. So I hate to be this guy, but if you want to catch that, you can like and subscribe and bell and all the things that YouTube lets you do now. We'll be back here with more Python and PyScript content in the future. Thanks for joining me. I've been Jeff Glass, and I will catch you next time. Thanks, y'all.